Greetings! You've reached the Signal Watch Halloween series. Join me and my creepy cadre of co-contributors as we examine artifacts from the catacombs, boldly explore creeping horrors, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this spooky.
Woo! Welcome back for another spooky podcast. Today, with me is
Marshall Preddy.
And we're talking about two very spooky movies.
Yep.
Which are
Poltergeist, the 1982 haunted house movie directed by Steven Spielberg, or actually Toby Cooper.
That's one of the things I wanted to talk about.
It is written and produced by Steven Spielberg.
Yes. And the other?
And the other is the Amityville Horror.
So I find these two movies a great pairing. There's a lot of reasons that they pair very, very well.
There ended up being some really good symmetries and contrasts between these two movies that I really enjoyed rewatching them both.
One of them supposedly based on a true story.
Yep.
The other, Poltergeist, is completely fabricated, but supposedly there is the Poltergeist curse that leaked into the real world. Are you familiar with the Poltergeist curse?
You'll have to educate me on that.
Okay, so the Amityville Horror is, in theory, based on the real life experience of the Lutzes. They moved to a home in Amityville, New York. I'm not familiar with the geography of the greater New York City area.
I think it was on Long Island.
Yes, that sounds correct. And a series of murders had occurred, or a mass murder had occurred, where the son of a family had come through and shot everyone in the family dead. Kind of seems like he had some sort of schizophrenic break. Several months later, the Lutzes purchased the home, moved in, and said they had all of these experiences and fled the home. Poltergeist, the curse of Poltergeist was that Dominic Dunn, who plays the elder daughter in the family, was murdered immediately after the filming of the movie by her boyfriend. And then Heather O'Rourke, who plays Carol Ann, died during the filming of Poltergeist 3. That's kind of it. That's kind of the Poltergeist curse. I'd heard, other members of the cast and crew also died. But I couldn't find any evidence of what that would have been in my 3-minute Google search.
So the curse is that people who were involved in the filming of the original movie eventually died.
Which,
that happens to people.
Curious. Yeah, it's anyway. So that I find it fascinating that both of them have these kind of like real life ties that may or may not have actually occurred, but it adds to the lore of both spooky movies as we get into them.
I thought one of the things that and this is one of the criticisms consistent it was at the time people reviewing the movie thought it was a little bit hamstrung by the fact that it was based on a true story, and so they were trying to have some level of fidelity. It was based on the book of what happened to the Lutzes, also called the Amityville Horror. And it was trying to be true to the accounts in the book.
Right.
I think that, and I agreed with some of the criticisms, that it sort of created some problems in terms of internal coherence of the story, building a movie instead of a series of events. And it starts to become a sort of recounting, well, then this happened, and then this happened, all of which was quote-unquote true in the sort of experience of the Lutzes and the subsequent novelization or the book that was born out of these experiences. But because it is trying to have this certain fidelity to this book, which was, I think, a big bestseller, it ends up jumbled. It ends up a sort of series of horrific events instead of a sort of a more coherent story, which I think, in my opinion, is what you see with Poltergeist. To me, this is and I haven't gotten your take on this. We didn't talk about it before. This is a compare and contrast between two very similar movies, but also two very different movies. One of them is very good, Poltergeist, and one of them is very bad, which is the Amityville Horror. But there's affection for both of these movies in terms of where they sit in the American horror canon. They were both very commercially successful movies, and have spawned multiple sequels, none of which are good. none of them are good. But
that's the real curse of them.
that's the real curse of them. But they loom large in the imagination of the 70s and 80s. I mean, in terms of modern horror films, and we're really talking about, the 70s and 80s. I think they're an interesting pairing for so many reasons. I know we'll get into it.
I completely agree. 100%. I had not seen either movie in probably Amityville. I don't think I'd seen since maybe freshman year of college, maybe summer after. I couldn't tell you the last time I saw Poltergeist all the way through. It's just kind of on cable, so I'll catch snippets of it every once in a while. But all the way through, maybe high school. It had been a really long time. I was shocked at how badly Amityville hung together.
Yep.
That said, I also got the feeling it was kind of someone got the rights to it who maybe were not the most skilled filmmakers and didn't entirely understand how movies were structured.
It started off well. Here's what the strange thing is. I thought so. There were some moments, especially the cinematography. So there are two things that I liked a lot about Amityville. One that deteriorated over time, one that didn't. The cinematography of that film was really interesting. There were some great shots of that movie. All of it was pretty well composed for a movie of that time. I thought they had an interesting filmmaker. They had Margot Kidder, who's amazing. I mean, they had some heavy hitters on the casting department. None of them but Margot Kidder turned in a decent performance, but it was like it had all the ingredients of a good movie. Mm-hmm. It did not get made into a good movie. The other thing that was good about that movie was the score, which was, I think, nominated and may have won an Academy Award. It was the only award it won. It was the only award it was really nominated. I think Margot Kidder was nominated Best Actress for sort of an American sci-fi horror, award.
A Hugo or something.
Yeah, exactly. But the score was well thought of at the time, which I thought was interesting because I think the score is good, but it's not as successful as the score for Poltergeist.
Right.
So I think it's interesting in that movie could have been a lot better than it was. Is the way they invested money in it. They had, I think, competent Hollywood writers, director. It should have been a lot better than it was, and it was bad.
So to compare and contrast it with Poltergeist, which had the power of 1980 whatever Steven Spielberg behind it, he was, I guess, trying to get into producing as well as directing at this point.
He wasn't quite the juggernaut that he would later become, but this is when he starts to enter his 80s prime, 1982.
Yeah. I guess when I said, does it start off well? One of the things that bothered me about Amityville, unlike Poltergeist, the polar opposite of Poltergeist, was there was very little establishment of who these people were. Like, we start Poltergeist with the hero of the movie, the golden retriever, right? And here's each of the members of the family, yes. And here's how they relate to each other in the subsequent scenes, and here's kind of who they are. I couldn't tell you the names of the kids in Amityville Horror. I understood the little girl's role was to kind of pop up and be creepy every once in a while.
Both movies, by the way.
Right.
Both movies have the little girl as a sort of oracle of evil, like someone who can see what the others cannot.
Yeah, but we kind of get a little bit through some dialogue of, okay, Margot Kidder came into this marriage with kids, and James Brolin is giving up his freewheeling ways. He's decided to convert to Catholicism. We find out 2/3 of the way through the movie, because that was kind of a big question. Like, when that's the question mark I have over my head of, like, there's some rules in Catholicism. What happened here? And so, yeah, I just never felt like I knew.
You're right. There's a lot of things they didn't establish. I guess what I meant to say. I guess what I should say, I should clarify, is that the structure, the story is terrible in the movie. The performances are bad, but there is at least the patina. Like, somebody knows how to make a movie, is making a movie, and they just never get it done. Yeah. It doesn't. You're right in the terms of the structural parts, because it's a great compare and contrast, because these are both, just to set up the plot, these are both haunted house movies. Family moves in Poltergeist. It's not clear when exactly they moved in, but it's relatively recently that they've been in this new development in California. This other family moves in. They slowly become acquainted, or not so slowly become acquainted, with the haunted phenomena in the house, and are eventually persuaded to leave the house because of all the crazy crap that happens to them inside. That's the movie. But that's the story of both movies, but they both go about it in very, very different ways. And as we say, but one of them is very successful, and one of them is almost hilarious in how badly it fails.
Yeah, I want to talk a little about Amityville, because we've already established we think it's kind of clunky and kind of how it does these things, but it really felt to me like you said, it's this checkbox of, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and there's no connective tissue between those things. There's things like Rod Steiger shows up as the priest, and just walks into the house, just wanders around the house, has the fly room incident. You don't really know why he's there. You don't really know what's going on.
He's blessing the house. But they could have made that clear.
Right.
Like, they try, he's supposed to, the idea, and you sort of can, it's the second time through, you sort of can find out, it's like, they had the script in front of them. They did not share that with the audience. Yeah. And, they sort of knew the structure of the movie, but it was like you're left guessing at it.
And I was left guessing because, supposedly, I'm doing air quotes, true story. Was there any corroboration from the church? Like, did this person actually exist, or was this made up for the film? Like, you're talking about someone outside of the Lutzes, including the sister who's the nun, or the aunt who's the nun, who, ends up puking, a couple blocks from the house. But it just felt like incident, and there wasn't anything, again, to establish the characters, to get you invested, to make you care. It was, and because it was happening every scene, it was literally started feeling to me just like a series of sequences.
Yeah. There's a lot that's implied. It's almost like it's trying to be a more sophisticated movie than it is. So you have to sort of figure out, this is a young couple. They've I can say young. She's got 3 kids. Yeah. She's remarried. Yeah. George is a stepdad of 3 kids. He's a surveyor. They've just moved in, or they're looking at they buy the home. So they're talking to the realtor about the home. They know about the murder. So they didn't hide the backstory. They told this young couple about the murders. They said, well, how? And I think in a very famous line, houses don't have memories, which flies in the face of every haunted house movie that's ever been made. And so the moment he says that, you realize the error that they're making. They're making the classic horror movie error of disregarding the lore and taking on the challenge, the haunted house challenge. So they're going to move into the house. I thought it did a good job of establishing a good job, but not so good job. You really get the sense that there's affection between them. Like, you really get the sense that they're an affectionate couple, that they care about each other, that they care about their family. they spend some time trying to establish the character of George and Kathy Lutz. The sort of early romance between them in the house, where you see this I thought it was nice. I thought this sort of setting up of they're affectionate, they have a happy sex life, they're a normal couple with 3 kids.
In the ugliest bedroom I've ever seen.
But they're presented as a working family when they enter the house.
Yeah.
The house is what messes them up.
Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to establish, is this is a family, this family works, but as soon as they move in, George Lutz starts freaking out. He starts losing his mind. He becomes he starts out as being very amiable, and he becomes, over this course of the movie, more and more psychotic and troubled by the house. You can tell the house is having an evil effect on him. He's I thought some of the things that I thought they did well was the constant wood chopping and the fire. He's constantly cold, and it's the dad who slowly loses his mind and becomes an axe murderer actually has a rich history in Gothic American literature.
I was this and The Shining were my 2
So
points.
this is not that is a common trope. When I was in, and I wish I'm not going to be able to tell you, dear listener, what it was, but I can tell you that these stories go back as far as literature in America goes back. The dad who loses his mind and engages in a murder-suicide. It's because the reason that has such a prominent place in American fiction is because it happens all the time in real life. So the crazy dad who kills everybody is not an alien thing, but that's the tension in this movie. Is that the through line of this movie is you're wondering if the house is going to be successful in corrupting and driving George mad, so that he follows in the footsteps of the earlier killer and kills his whole family. Yeah. That's the real tension of this movie. But it's disjointed, right? Because it's not just the story of that. It's also, and this is one of the failures of Amityville, among many, is that it's really trying to be a horror movie in multiple ways. Oh, the house is haunted, or is it George that's becoming slowly corrupted and driven insane? And you don't know what to be afraid of. So that's a key part for me of the incoherence of the movie, is that it's trying to tell multiple stories.
But The Shining did it.
That's true.
I mean, The Shining did it, and we all consider that to be kind of the horror movie, right? And so that would also be a great pairing with Amityville.
It would be, and in that there's a lot of mirror scenes from Amityville that mirror what Shining did, but it's much less successful. And I still feel like one of the things that The Shining does really well that Amityville doesn't, and I feel Poltergeist does this really well too, is the show don't tell. It's really displaying the horror to you, whereas Amityville's grasp of horror comes from an entirely different line of films. It's more like The Omen. It's more like Rosemary's Baby, where it's psychological horror, and the way they're trying to communicate the horror is not through practical effects or special effects, or it's more like through the reaction of the actors. Yeah. There's blood on the wall, there's some other stuff, but it's really very old school. It's like they had no special effects budget. So there's blood on the walls, there's black sludge in the toilet, but other than that, everything is like the only way they have to sell the horror is the reactions of the actors and the interior psychologies of these actors. There's the priest who visits the house. There's flies everywhere, but really the way you're supposed to be getting the horror is Rod Steiger's sweat, is his becoming overcome. Same thing with the nun. She walks in, she immediately becomes violently ill. But there's nothing external that tells you this, and that I feel like is a key difference because it's almost like The Shining had a kind of surreality to it, to what it was showing you on screen. It was letting you in. It was letting you see the things that the dad was going through, the visions that he was having, the blood gushing down the hallway. These were visceral events that you got to experience along with the protagonist, so that you could you could feel their insanity coming in on
I see what you're saying, yeah.
And that's not present in the Amityville.
Yeah.
They're just telling you, hey, these people are freaking out. But why? It's never like, another example is when his partner's girlfriend gets out of the car and goes up to the house and immediately says, well, I'm not going in there. This house is creepy. Mm-hmm. Cut away to the house. The house looks like a picture of, it looks like an amazing house. It's got this, lattice. It's got ivy. It looks amazing. And you're like, I don't know what's creeping you out. Yeah. The only way I know it's creepy is because you are telling me it's creepy. Yeah. Or it's lit weird ways at night. They don't really have an imagination in order to sort of deliver on, to communicate how the house is driving these people mad.
Yeah.
It's telling you that it's driving them mad, but you really have no firsthand evidence of that.
Right. Which is interesting, given that I guess the book was probably, at least as told to the author by the Lutzes, and who had been describing their experience. I've never read Amityville Horror. I probably never will read Amityville Horror. We'll see what happens next October as I'm figuring out what I'm going to read for Halloween. But it just has, it just, to me, by the time I got 2/3 of the way through the movie, I was kind of getting bored. Like, I remember turning to Jamie at some point about 1/3 of the way through, and I was like, is this movie not very good?
It's not.
And she was like, no, I don't think it's very good. And I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, which is always weird to say about a movie that's considered to be somewhat of a classic.
I got 28 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, no, it was roundly panned when it came out.
Okay.
It was not well thought of, and which is, again, very different from Poltergeist, which is received almost universal acclaim. It's a classic. Mm-hmm. But you can tell why it failed. It's like there are lots of people that have affinity for the movie. I don't see it. I don't know why they, other than Margot Kidder's performance. There's not anything even really memorably awesome about it. Like that's actually scary to me.
Yeah, there's no blood coming out of the elevator shot. There's no Jack going up the stairwell at Shelley Duvall with
And part of it seems positively Ed Woodish. Like they put some red corn syrup floating, dripping down the walls. I'm supposed to be scared by the wall barely bleeding. It's
one of the things that I did wonder about watching this, not to get into some territory I normally don't talk about on the podcast, but we're going to dive there right now. I do think it helps. Probably if you're less secular.
Yes.
It's attacking priests. It's attacking nuns. Yes. It seems to be, it somehow gets into the church and somehow drives Rod Steiger mad in the church. And those are things much like The Exorcist. I don't know how scary The Exorcist is to people who grew up secular or who are secular. I still think The Exorcist is a well-made movie. I would never take that away from it, but I have not found it particularly scary since I was 14. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wonder if there's not some of that here as well. It's like, I'm a good Catholic. Of course this is. And I've heard from people about The Exorcist.
Right.
I grew up Catholic. The Exorcist is terrifying. And so, please write in and let us know if you find this particularly scary, if that's part of your makeup. All opinions are welcome. But I think that may be one of the challenges of the film, is it uses these things that you're like, oh, but they're so, we elevate these people. They should be immune. These are the people who are supposed to be above all of that. And in this movie, of course, they're getting devastated by the evil forces in the house. And from a secular standpoint, you're like, wow, this house really has it in for the clergy.
Well, it is funny because you're right. These two movies are one of the I made a whole chart, but one of the key differences between these two movies is their approach is where the horror is coming from. The Amityville Horror is very much a classic in the good guys who are trying to help are the priest. Mm-hmm. And very similar to The Exorcist. It's hitting some of those same beats. Like, we can only find one priest who actually believes, and the priest will help us. Mm-hmm. Although even that story is like, instead the priest is driven insane, right? And he's not believed by his own church. I think there's a lot of very interesting drama on the story of the priest and the nun trying to communicate this up the ladder of the church. In some ways, it's almost a political drama. This little subplot, but that's not. It's meaningless if you aren't Catholic.
Yeah.
And this movie is trying to sort of get at the secular the growing secularism in America, right? It's like, oh, I don't care about evil. I don't believe in evil. Evil's not real. Houses don't have memories. I'm George and I'm not Catholic, but Kathy is, and Kathy has her family, and there's this tension between the natural world and George's skepticism and Catholicism, the idea that Satan isn't that Satan is real and hell is real. Whereas Poltergeist is almost completely secular. There's no real when they bring in somebody who's an expert, it's a parapsychologist, it's a spiritualist. There's no like, hey, go get me a priest and help us,
right.
Go get a preacher to help us. It's the internal team of experts. It's basically Ghostbusters,
right?
A few years before Ghostbusters come out. So the people they go for help, I looked in the yellow pages. There's no who am I going to find? It's like so that's one of the big things is that if Catholicism is important, they put the cross on the wall, right? And then it's inverted and it's black. That now I'm supposed to be frightened, but if you're, agnostic, or it's like this tiny little cross, and now it's backwards and black, and like that's a key special effect. That's what you're going to blow my mind with.
Yeah,
I'm not feeling it. I'm gonna rub it off, and the way they go through now, there's no atheist in foxholes. Now they're going through the house with the cross, chanting. Now all of a sudden George is religious. Now all of a sudden he knows how to it's like it's not clear where they get the idea that they're going to now go through the house without the priests and start casting out the spells.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the Red Room in this.
Isn't that the Red Room that they do some research on the house with the partner's girlfriend or wife. They go to the library. They find out when they do their research that this house, I guess loosely, is on some land where 18th century Satanist settled. Ketchum, also a surveyor, by the way. I did my Wikipedia research. He was also a surveyor like George. So Ketchum was driven from Salem for practicing witchcraft, and then he settled in this area. Now they find out it's also built on a Shinnecook burial ground. So that's another key thing. And now there's this red room that they uncover by breaking into the wall underneath.
That was the scariest thing to me. That was a load-bearing wall.
Yes. Yeah.
People, you can't just start taking pickaxes to walls in your home. I don't care what's going on.
Well, it's a glowing red room where there's like a astral projection of the prior killer's face. This is what they're trying to scare us with, and it's like this is hokey. This is like afternoon D movie stuff that you're showing us.
Apparently, that was Brolin's brother.
That makes sense.
Which I love that's like Thanos' uncle floating there in space.
Oh my god. James Brolin was so bad in this movie.
Yeah, Jamie does lots of Googling when she's not enjoying the movie while we're watching the movie, just like shouting out facts at me. And she's like, that's James Brolin's brother. James Brolin couldn't get any work after this movie. Like, so.
Because he's bad in it.
Yeah.
He's really, really bad.
I mean, he's a good, solid being in Dynasty actor.
Oh, he looks good. Now he's
a handsome.
He's a handsome man.
Yeah,
he's got like Don Henley, like fro with the beard going. Man, he's looking good. For
you can see how Barbra Streisand decided. Yeah, I'm going for that.
Yes, James Brolin, square jaw.
Yeah,
square jaw.
But he was not particularly great. I actually thought his little buddy was pretty good.
Yes. His partner, who's in the surveying business, he's like the voice of reason.
Yeah.
Every movie has a voice of reason that comes in. This guy he's like, hey, you're ignoring your business, and this is how they're showing that George is losing his mind. He doesn't know what day it is. He's not paying his workers.
Right.
He's not even going into work. His only job right now is to chop enough wood to not feel cold in the house.
Right. I will say this. People keep coming to him and saying, you look terrible. He does. His excuse is that he has the flu. He looks like he has the flu. And yet people keep challenging him on this. I'm like, no, this dude looks like he has the flu. He does
look like he has the flu. He looks awful.
I also want to pitch something I'm going to call the Signal Watch Challenge. Because this happens in this movie. It has nothing to do with anything else. Tell me what happens sometime when you walk into a bar and say, I want 2 beers. Because that's what everybody does in every movie. No one ever orders beer by brand in movies. And 2 beers always show up.
Yeah.
There's never any. It's the same thing as nobody ever says goodbye on the phone in movies. They just hang up.
Right.
So just I want you to try it. Tell me what happens.
That's an interesting. Yeah, because we saw the 555 phone number on the side of George's. That there's some very movie things happening in this movie.
Anyway, I didn't want to totally distract everybody with that. I don't want to get too far off, but I'm calling that the Signal Watch Challenge. Try it. Tell me what happens. Also, try hanging up on people without saying goodbye. Tell me what happens. So they will call you back.
One of the other interesting things about this movie that I thought, and you alluded to it a little earlier, is where the F are the kids? In this movie, like in Amityville, for large stretches, you have no idea where the kids are. If I were in a haunted house, I'd want my kids with me.
Yeah,
I would not want to be separated from them. But there are large parts of the movie where it looks like this couple lives alone in this house. You don't know where the kids are.
Yeah.
You see them playing when they want the kids there to show them for effect. They're there.
Yeah.
When the babysitter gets locked in the closet and the little girl is just creepily sitting there while the babysitter's screaming out and like, please
bloody
come help me, bloodying her knuckles while she bangs on the door and can't get out. Then she's there and she's like, oh, I see Jody. My friend Jody is here. Yeah. So the imaginary friend. But there's large stretches where, like when they're banging on the red room, where are the kids? They don't know. I'm like, where's the dog?
Yeah.
Throughout Poltergeist, the dog is very much a character in this movie. Like, you know where the dog is. You don't know where this dog is until the last bit. They go, oh, we have to go back and get the dog. This dog that you haven't tracked at all, that you don't know, the dog has played almost no role in the movie, that now becomes crucially important that you have to go back and get it.
Yeah.
What? You almost died going back to get this dog, and there's a dog rescue moment, hey Lassie, where the dog pulls him out of this black sludge that George falls into when he goes back to rescue the dog.
One of the kids is played by Mino Police. You may remember from Voyagers.
Oh, okay.
And he is the brother of Punky Brewster. So
that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So just a little bit of trivia for you there.
So the kids are barely there in the movie. Allegedly they have kids, but there's no TV in the house.
Yeah.
What are the kids doing?
Playing.
Yeah, I guess we're just out in this rural New York area next to a lake. The house is freaking haunted. We know that almost immediately, but we're just going to let the kids do whatever until it's bedtime.
I don't know, man. I remember the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of my parents locking me out of the house at 10 in the morning and saying, come back for supper.
Whereas Poltergeist is like classic Spielberg, right? Not only are there kids in the movie, but you see a lot of the action unfold from the child's point of view. And that is classic Spielberg.
Let's go ahead and pivot to Poltergeist.
Yeah. So in Poltergeist, you see much more successfully the nuclear family depicted. As you mentioned, we see them. You see each member of the family while they're sleeping, and you know who they are. He actually develops each of their characters individually. They each experience the haunting of the house differently, and he shows you that throughout the movie. Their fears are each exploited in different ways, and they're full characters.
Yeah.
So this is a family, and it's very much the story of what happens to a family. Not just the dad goes slowly crazy, but instead this is a family that pulls together in the face of not even unspeakable evil, but restlessness of spirits. It's what fascinates me about Poltergeist, maybe more than any other movie, is that he's not really painting anything as good or evil. These are spirits that are interacting with the physical world, and they come into conflict.
Yeah.
And this is what happens in that, and this is what happens to these people as they wrestle with these spirits who weren't allowed to move with their bodies. They're not allowed to rest. And it's not, oh, this house is evil, or oh, there's unspeakable evil. It's, you put this house on top of their graves and you didn't remove the bodies, you didn't treat them respectfully, and now they can't rest. So what are they supposed to do? I find it fascinating in that there's almost no bad guys in this movie. It's just
James Cairn is the closest you get to a bad guy in this movie. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I feel like that's the thing. I think in both movies there's this idea, the house was built on a burial ground, which is really a metaphor for America when you think about it. And
there's a lot written about The Shining about that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is what makes American Gothic uniquely American, right? Is a lot of what's haunted about America is that we live on stolen land, and that idea is really at the heart of both these movies. That the land is corrupt, that the American dream in some ways is corrupt, and I think this is for this movie, really both these movies, but you really see it in Poltergeist. There's this whole, we're putting these new developments in. We've got to develop, we've got to build. We're nestling these sleepy bedroom communities on top of dead people, but yet each of these individual families is heroic, right? The American dream, the broad American dream, whether you're talking about the East Coast story of Amityville, weighted down by stories of Satanism and witchcraft, and people wrongfully executed for that, versus what's in versus California, where you're talking about westward expansion. In both cases, the American dream is somewhat corrupted, but the people that we're rooting for, the families, they're not. They're the heroes of the movie. We're rooting for them.
Sure.
And I think that's that tension that's at the heart of both of these movies.
Yeah, there's really no scene in Amityville like the one with James Cairn and Craig T. Nelson, where they're standing at the top of that beautiful valley looking out over all those plats where they're going to be building. And it's the deal with the devil scene.
That's right.
There's just nothing like that at all in Amityville.
We couldn't afford to move their cemeteries. We couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
So we just built on top of their bodies. Yeah. You see that explicitly, and that's why I love. There's so. It's a contrast because so little is done in Amityville. Like, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of things they could have explored. There are a lot of things that you could have done to make that a good movie, and they didn't do it. Spielberg does everything. Like, he gets way more ideas in this movie than you would think were there, including the sort of political. It's in some ways a very political movie. I mean, you see Craig T. Nelson's character Stephen reading the Ronald Reagan book, while Mom is smoking pot reading a self-help book. That was
like the most 80s. Early 80s possibly, because I remember those parents.
He's a Reagan Democrat. It's like,
well, and I also half wonder, because Craig T. Nelson's one of the Hollywood Republicans, right? If he didn't show up with his Reagan book and said, "This is what I'm going to be reading in this scene," but I mean, it felt very real. And I remember seeing that scene as a kid, and going, "Oh my God, this feels so real."
That's what Poltergeist does. It's so naturalistic, whereas Amityville has these old horror tropes, and it's sort of it's what I would call Gothic. It's, you're in a haunted house movie. Like, there's there's all these things, you're in a heightened reality. Poltergeist. What's amazing about Poltergeist is how naturalistic it is. They're showing you it's a horror movie, but you see the Star Wars sheets. You see the nice house. That's you see that the family's watching football. This family has a kitchen. They have a bathroom. They have, you see their whole house. You see their whole lives.
I felt like I understood the geography of the house.
Yes.
We're in Amityville. Like, as well shot as it was kind of like, this room, we're just going to show this room, we're going to show, here's a hallway. It was much harder to understand where and when things were happening versus that geography of the Poltergeist house was important. If you're going to understand, this is the entry point, the ceiling for some reason is the exit point. But yeah, and the JoBeth Williams was, I got the feeling from watching it, the intention was probably coming off Big Chill. She was supposed to be the big star of this movie.
She got lead billing.
Yeah. And she's great in it. There's no question, but it becomes an ensemble movie.
It does. And Spielberg gives credit, I guess, when he wrote it that way. He's like, the little boy, he's got, so much happens to him. He's almost eaten by a tree.
Yeah.
He wrestles with this clown. It's each of those characters, including the teenage daughter, has a very personal horror scene interacting with the movie. They have moments. It's like each of them has a movie but it's very well pulled together, and you see them becoming aware of the presence in the house that at first appears kind of benign and sort of like it's fun. It's like interesting.
I loved the transition from JoBeth Williams' wonder at what was happening. She'd lost the whole day, as you would.
It's comedic.
Yeah.
Part of it, when the chairs are all suddenly stacked up like Jenga, she's losing her mind, and she's so excited to show, but she doesn't know that the horror yet. She can only see this sort of like, this is crazy, this is weird, isn't it?
Yeah, having her daughter slide across the floor, and all the other things she's been doing that day. Tape that she's got for all the lines on the floor. I mean, that's what you would do.
She tells Stephen, "Hey, I want you to think back to when you had an open mind. That's what I want you to see this with." And that might as well be Spielberg talking to us. It's like, think back to when you had you're not in a Gothic house. No, you're not in a freaking castle manor like this. He's like, Spielberg's like, no, your haunted house is going to be just like a regular house. This is your McMansion, and we're going to do it here. Yeah. It's not. I'm not going to tell you the house is haunted. I'm going to show you what happens and reveal it to you at the same time it's revealed to this family. That's what's so amazing about Poltergeist. It's so different. And I can't really even think of a movie since then where they've relied on. They haven't had the house just look imposing and weird, instead of because that's a trope, right?
Yeah.
The house is the Addams Family house. That's the kind of house that's haunted, not your regular everyday house.
Yeah, the only what was the one that was like the found footage one of the people wrestling with the ghost in their house? It came out about 12 years ago.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah,
it's rare though.
Yeah, it's rare. It's very rare.
It's rare, and that's part of Spielberg's genius. Is no, I want to show you something that could happen to anybody.
Yeah,
this is any family. This family has all the same stuff that you bought and put in your house. This family has, and they're doing all the same things that you do. Only they're suffering a presence of a poltergeist. And it's like, what if this happened to you? And it's so much more visceral because it's every family sees themselves in this one.
One of my favorite things in the movie this time was pretty much leading up to when it burst through the window was the tree outside the window. Like, whoever designed that tree was a genius. Like, I can see writing that down as an idea in a book or something, because you wouldn't actually have to design that tree. But there's faces in that tree. Just kind of, sort of. It's really interesting to look at, and we always remember Carol Ann from the movie, but we don't always think of the little boy.
Right.
And there's these different levels of sensitivity to kind of what's going on. You get the feeling maybe JoBeth Williams as a child, because she talks about her sleepwalking and whatever, may have been more sensitive. The boy clearly is sensitive, but Carol Ann, who they say was born in the house at some point, is the one who now they want. She belongs to the house, right? Who clearly, and there are some things that I wish they had not done. I'll be honest. I wish they had not done the 80s animation from the TV to the wall, where it's like that didn't age particularly well.
It did not. Though at the time, I mean, when I saw this in the 80s, like I saw this in the theater, and it didn't bother me then. But now, of course,
Well, it was just so like on the nose.
Yeah.
And there are different points in the movie where I was like, I think this is Tobe Hooper. I think this is Steven Spielberg. Like the scene where the scientists are there and they're trying to talk to Carol Ann through the TV when they first show up, and the scientists are like climbing over the TV to see if there's any wires connected to it. That was Spielberg. There's no doubt in my mind Tobe Hooper was on a bender and Spielberg took over for this portion. He's like, this is too important. Because there's all this stuff online. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Tobe Hooper was the guy who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yep. We reviewed Life Force. Me and Simon did.
One of my favorites, but it's campy and it's really bad.
But I don't think he had the delicacy of direction to think of these things that Spielberg kind of made his hallmark.
That's right.
And so, like, when I watch the scene, it's moving. That scene is heartbreaking when you're watching it. Jo Beth Williams just tears your heart out during that sequence. I'm not sure Tobe Hooper was going to be the director.
The whole time when she's crying out to her daughter, it's emotional. Mm-hmm. It is, you feel that. Mm-hmm. And it's something that is, I can't think of another horror movie that works like Poltergeist works. It's like, I'm going to send the mom in. I'm going to bring her back across. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably an influential movie, but I can't think of a precedent for it. Like this where the mom is the hero. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really, she's the one who risked her life to go into this spectral world and come back out with her daughter, and you can't help but find it affecting and emotional and scary. Even though you're not seeing much at all of what's happening in that world. And I think that would be the tendency now. I didn't see the remake, but the tendency now would be, well, let's show what it's like in the world where Carol Ann is trapped, right? Yeah. Like, well, that's the beauty of it, is that you can't, that nobody can, that you're experiencing it the same way as the family is. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think that's also why not only are special effects bad, but you want it to be unseen. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it powerful. So when you see the spectral thing, like, it's fine when the energy bursts across and creates the doorway, but you're right, the little fingers that come out, that doesn't feel like Spielberg. Yeah. That doesn't feel like Spielberg, because he's already shown you what you need to know about why this is scary. He's using the little girl to illustrate why, and her connection with this, with the idea that the voices are coming from the TV. That's what is scary. Mm-hmm. And that's just like this. You've got this oracle in your home, and the idea that could be a vehicle for what is, that's been effective in horror for a long time. And like, I mean, think of The Ring, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like this idea that the media world can cross over to the real one, Freddy Krueger, right? That's what's scary, and that's where I feel like Spielberg just has a knack for finding the real horror in these in the mundane, and pulling it out and showing to you. Whereas, I think Toby Hooper, those fingers seem like him.
Well, one of the things that it hasn't aged poorly, if you remember it, but if you're a younger viewer, you may not know this. TV used to not be on after like 2 a.m. or midnight, depending on the channel. And it was a very strange thing to watch that. This movie starts with the Star Spangled Banner, to get back to your political thing here. And then it fades over to the snow. And for those of us who couldn't sleep growing up, that was an eerie moment. And it taps into that, and that's something I hadn't thought about in 15, 20 years?
Yeah,
'Cause
no, that
TV doesn't go on
you could turn on the TV on an actual channel and it would just be snow. Now sometimes it would be the color test, right? The different colors, and then they'd have the what I remember is like I remember getting up early enough to where the first thing that would play on the TV station, your local affiliate, would be the Star Spangled Banner. Yeah. And then they'd go into the regular programming, Thunderbirds are go. Whatever
Marionette. Hell of a way to wake up.
Yeah, exactly. That would come on right after that. But the idea that the TV could be something, a gateway to something different. And again, I think this is Spielberg micro. You know, he's like sort of saying like America is expanding, America is becoming less innocent, a more modern media landscape. I mean, the last thing this family does is what?
Rolls that TV out on
puts the TV out on the patio. It goes back in, and it's like our relationship to everything, our relationship to our new big houses, our relationship to media, the books. Like Spielberg does a really good job. I keep saying Spielberg and Cooper do a really good job of showing you this family, what they're reading, what they're watching, what they're doing, and putting you in their place and asking you, well, those are the same things I do. How is my life different from theirs?
Yeah.
How close am I to this?
Yeah. This is a movie that I feel like was my very first kind of adult horror movie to show your kids. I saw this one in second grade. I was not traumatized by it.
I had nightmares.
Did you?
I did, but I loved them. I'm with you. To go back to the tree thing, I found the tree and the clown terrifying. I was this little kid, and I remember that I found them both just horrendously interesting and at the same time terrifying. I had nightmares for like 2 years after that. At the same time, my brother and I went home and we drew pictures, and my mom got us to. She was like, well, you should send off and ask them how they did the special effects, and we did that. So we were like, my mom wrote a letter. This is one of the things.
Hats off to your mom.
Yeah, so we wrote a letter. We drew pictures of our favorite scenes, and my mom wrote a letter to them asking we would like to see a making of this movie. It never got to them. It got returned to sender. I didn't find that out until my mom died, and I went through her effects. But my mom went through this whole thing with me. We made pictures. I remember this afternoon, just like it was yesterday, of my mom. One of my favorite mom memories of her like, hey, you guys should make pictures, and then we'll write a real letter to the makers of Poltergeist. And it was like, as a kid, I have drawings of what I found amazing about this movie, saying like, I liked it when all the grays popped up at the end. Well, how did you do that? Because it was an amazing. They did a lot of cool things special effects wise that kids remember, but it's a very affecting movie. As a kid, it's great for kids to see because it's not too scary. Yeah. But it's also great because it's about what happens to those kids. Like it's a movie about kids as much as it is about the adults.
And the adults in this movie, like there's Craig T. Nelson, the most you ever see him go, like, he's depressed. He's drinking a beer as he walks through the house talking to the scientist. He deserves a beer at that point. Let's all be honest.
He's a good dad.
Yeah, and that's the thing it's like the kids don't have that anxiety to worry about in this movie. Yeah. The parents are together. They're not squabbling about this. That's never shown.
Dad's not hitting mom like he does in Amityville.
He's not, get your kids out of here or any of that, like he does in Amityville. So yeah, I would definitely make this a movie that, when your kids start hitting late elementary school, something like that.
Mine are 10 and 7, and they both say it. They both saw it when they were 9 and 6, and they loved it. They loved it, and they thought some of the effects were cheesy.
Well, when she opens the door, it's hilarious, but those effects, of course, you do it better now. I'll just put it that way.
What really hits effect-wise is that tree. The tree, you're exactly, that tree coming in, almost swallowing him. Dad, it's eating me, Dad! I mean, it's crazy now looking at it. And the clown? Dude, Winter Clown's not terrifying.
Well, I read a thing saying that is ground zero for when we turned on clowns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like they were like, someone went through and said, people used to love clowns. What changed? And basically they were like, we think it was this. Everything we point to is this doll.
When did It come out? When did It?
That was like late
come
80s.
Out? Was it?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
And I think the TV movie was like 92 or something like that.
Interesting. So yeah, no, I don't know when It the novel. I'm trying to remember when It was. When It the novel came out, I want to say 85.
Because when I was growing up, like it was like Bozo and stuff. Like clowns were just part of what you got as a kid.
That clown was terrifying.
Yeah.
And what's great, there's a great moment where he puts the Chewbacca jacket on. It becomes the face of Chewbacca. Like now as kids and as 80s kids, we're much more comfortable with our heroes, our movie heroes, and get rid of these weird gothic clowns that's in my room. He's fighting the clown. So many memorable scenes, but a lot of the horror happens to the kids, and you really connect with this movie as a kid. I don't know that there's, again, it's probably it's the single best horror movie for showing kids, I think, as an introduction to the genre.
Yeah. So I have a couple of different things that are real life related that I was going to talk about, as long as we got the mic rolling.
Let's do it.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I do not.
Okay. Full stop.
Full stop. Okay. Not at all.
Yeah. So nor do I. I'll be honest. And so so I love this is after the first two Frankenstein movies. Horror. This is probably my favorite horror genre. Vampires are fun. Mm-hmm. But I know vampires do not. There's no possibility of vampires existing. Right. And so, that's all turned into like this psychosexual thing, in 2019 at this point. And anyway, werewolves, whatever. It's an interesting thing. But
that's my least favorite.
Yeah,
I don't care about werewolves.
I always said I loved werewolves. The more of I've been doing them for the podcast, I'm like, there's not many good werewolf movies.
No. Teen Wolf. Teen Wolf is great. I love Teen Wolf.
That's about a family with a medical condition. That's what that's really about. And so it's like, at least it feels when these movies tap into that feeling you got when you were a kid of, I'm laying in bed at night and I'm hearing sounds and I don't know what they are.
Yes. The shadows, I don't know what the shadows are. I'm weirded out by my own house, and both these movies, why do they keep going to sleep in this damn house? Doesn't it, like, that's the question I have for both of them. I'm like, every night you sleep in this house. I mean, at some point, the house is creepy and weird. You went to sleep in a house.
I don't. Well, I think it's a good, like, the finale of this is good. Poltergeist. I don't understand why they are in the house for the final night they're in the house.
Yes.
At all.
That's right.
Like, if they could afford the Holiday Inn, I would have thought, we're just not going to be, we're going to spend whatever money we have to not be in the house this evening. I don't care if they think it's cleansed or not.
Yeah, you professionals, look, when you guys tell me it's cool to come back in here, I will, but otherwise, we need to work on this house, and I'll come back.
Yeah.
When the tree's not trying to eat my kids.
Right. So one of the things I've also been thinking about a little bit is I've been listening to the Night Owl podcast. And what that is, it was Laura had asked on Facebook to her Facebook friends, one of which I am, tell me a good Halloween podcast I should listen to, and up came Night Owl.
I saw this thread.
And it turns out, I didn't know until I listened to the first episode, it's local, it's Austin.
Oh. And
the first episode takes place at basically Spider House down near campus. And then the second one and third one take place at the Tavern on 12th and Lamar. And what I started thinking about with that is how different these movies treat ghosts and hauntings than we tend to actually talk about them in the kind of it's just a sense of unease. Things were broken in the morning when I came in. Things moved, sort of way we talk about. There's always this extra layer that gets added on for the movie to make it dramatic and have the special effects and whatnot. I guess at this point, I've seen a few movies like The Uninvited. The Haunting's pretty close to this but it's very rare that these movies keep it dialed back to a point of this is how we actually talk about ghosts in our real world, whether those people are just people scaring themselves in the dark. I don't know if I believed in ghosts or not, but I'll tell you, watching like 10 seasons of Ghost Hunters made me absolutely not believe in ghosts. Right. Those were dudes just scaring themselves in the dark, right, using stuff from Home Depot.
Yes.
And not understanding how science works.
Agreed.
So anyway, it's an interesting dichotomy of like what we think of as being these really good ghost movies versus how we actually talk about these spirits are trapped here, and here's how they're actually impacting people. And of course, there's always the telephone game of what actually happened. That was the initial story, and in 2019 what you're saying, right, what the actual story was. So anyway, got any final thoughts on either of these two movies? Anything left in your notes or on your chart that we need to cover?
I just think it's interesting, Poltergeist and really both these movies, and just as in just what they're trying to do is so different from each other. Mm-hmm. It's like Poltergeist seems like it's really telling the story of the family, and Amityville seems like it's telling the story of a house. And I ultimately think that's why Poltergeist seemed more compelling, mm-hmm, is that it's telling the story of the family. You're with them every step of the way, whereas Amityville's like, oh, there's some weird stuff going on in this house, and the only way you know about it is by the way these people react, mm-hmm, but you don't feel the bond that you do between the family members, the love that they have for one another, mm-hmm, the pulling together until really the end. When the dad, that's really the most affecting part, right? The dad goes back for the dog, mm-hmm, and then he comes back. They're getting everyone together. They're tumbling down the blood drenched stairway. Mm-hmm. That's probably the most successful part, is when they finally leave, mm-hmm, and you finally see them come together to battle the house. In Poltergeist, that's the whole movie, mm-hmm, and that's why it's more successful.
Yeah. One of the things I read online, I don't know if it's true or not, it was, I think, in Wikipedia. Of course, the Lutzes were real people. They're both past since. I couldn't find anything that the children of Kathy Lutz had to say about anything. People, of course, have lived in the house since with no incident. And apparently someone had like a yard sale or something, or just like they were a moving
It's a
sale. Beautiful
house, man.
Yeah, and apparently like people were lined up around the block because no one had been in the house ever. Wow. So yeah, everyone wanted to get their looky-loo, sneaky peek. But there was apparently one of the theories is the Lutzes were in cahoots with the attorney for the kid who killed his family. Mm. That they were trying to come up with some story of why this kid had done what he did.
So he was like 23, and he came up with all kinds of crazy stories about how they died, including that his mom helped him do the murders, and he had like multiple ways, and none of them were really paranormal in any real sense. It was like so I think this, especially the story of the haunted house being haunted, it comes from the writer and the Lutzes themselves. Mm-hmm. It's interesting how little of that seemed to be derived from the mass murderer guy, who's still in prison. Yeah,
and of course, mid-20s is often when people have schizophrenic and psychotic breaks. Yeah. So we do with that what you will.
There's some speculation he was motivated by insurance. An early question he asked of the cops before they thought he was the murderer, he said it was a mob hit, and the cops actually took this somewhat seriously because of the way they were killed in the location, and they may have even had mob ties. like had known mobsters. Then his story fell apart. But before they really had him as a suspect, because he is the one, and the movie covers this a little bit, right? He goes into the bar and says, "Hey, somebody shot my family." Mm-hmm. And he said, "You look just like the guy who did that," and he did. He bore a resemblance to it. But when he reported it, he asked about insurance. He's like, "Oh, how do I collect on my dad's insurance?"
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So it was like it could have been pretty mundane as to why he did it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
One of the, not to bring everyone down at the end, but I have a very firm memory tied to Poltergeist of one of the first time I woke up and was immediately sad was my clock radio went off and it was a news story about Heather O'Rourke dying. That was, I don't know why but I just remember like that was the first thing I literally heard that day. It was in the winter, I remember, and I was going to basketball practice, which was before school, so the alarm went off at like 6 a.m. or something. But yeah, it's really sad that this girl would probably now be going to like Comic-Cons and stuff and signing autographs.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Heather O'Rourke transplanted to our modern media sensibility and landscape. But yeah.
I mean, and probably to some extent Dominic Dunn as well, and both of these young people were unfortunately taken too soon. So.
What is the reputation this movie has in that sort of, the larger Comic-Con world? It doesn't seem like, it seems muted to me. Given its influence, it seems like it would be much more...
I don't know. That's a really good question. I assume it's one of those movies like E.T. everybody kind of holds up to a certain level. I don't know if the millennials who are coming behind us hold it with any reverence at all.
Right.
Because I don't hear them discussing it. Yeah, I mean, I've always heard people of our generation all kind of discuss it in glowing terms, and I was pleased that I did not change my opinion watching the movie.
Yeah, it does not suffer the Space Jam fallacy. It really, well, and it would be weird if it did. It is in some ways, and I think people don't think of it as a horror film as much as they think of it as a Steven Spielberg film, and that's not wrong. I think its themes are very Spielbergian, of this suburban, the children as protagonist, the sort of innocence and experience of these sort of American social and political, his macro, micro. There's all the Spielberg themes there that are just classic, that he also explores in E.T. So and really close encounters.
Definitely close encounters.
So it's what it's like to be a child in America in the 80s is like, who are you going to go to but Spielberg for that?
Yeah. I think it's a great place to end. So, Marshall, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this, if you hated it, please write in. Let us know what you thought. I hope that you guys have a fantastic and spooky Halloween. All right. Thanks so much. I have to figure out how to turn this off. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.